On February the 8th, 2025, that's just a couple months ago, at 11:53 p.m., Douglas County Sheriff's Deputy Nicholas Moore shot and killed Jalen Sebring at the Main Event Family Entertainment Center at 64 Centennial Boulevard in Highlands Ranch. This is a discussion of whether or not that conduct by Deputy Moore in shooting and killing Jalen Sebring is a crime under Colorado state law. We're going to discuss a lot of law, but we're going to talk about how the facts fit in it. Before I get into the details of this, I want to be clear about a couple things. One, I've never done this before. What I mean by that is I've had numerous officer-involved shootings, even two this year earlier that you probably haven't heard about. There's reasons for that. This one is different to me because of some of the issues at play, the community involvement, and I want to make sure that I pay the respect that is owed to all those involved to do this in a way that is both transparent and accountable. Jalen Sebring's life had value. The loss of that life is a tragedy. And having just spoken with his mother and other family members, the loss is incalculable. As a father of 3 boys, I cannot imagine what it would be like to have one of them go off to a birthday party, their own birthday party, and never return home. That loss is real. But the analysis I'm left to handle here is whether or not this was a violation of the law. There's a specific statute that governs what district attorneys are supposed to do in this case, and I'm going to talk through that. In some ways, I don't think the public has any appreciation for what we do with officer-involved shootings, and some of that has changed within the last few years with SB 217, and I want to go through that as well. This particular statute that governs district attorneys in Title 20, that's that first number you see up there, is all about DAs. It says that at the conclusion of an investigation, that the prosecutor is to release a report explaining the district attorney's findings. That's what I've done up till now. And you can go to any district attorney's website in the state of Colorado, and there is a place where they post letters. That's all I had to do. But that didn't feel like enough. It didn't feel like the respect this process or the people involved in this case deserved. So I've taken a different approach. There's another statute, Title 16 is all criminal procedure stuff, and it talks about how do we investigate an officer-involved shooting. And to be clear, so the public is aware, when an officer is involved in the use of deadly force, their parent agency, the people they work for, cannot investigate their conduct for the determination of whether a crime was committed. There might be an internal affairs investigation, there may be an investigation for some other underlying crime of others involved, but they cannot investigate this. So we've created a multi-agency team as suggested by the statute. It's called the Critical Incident Response Team. It is made up of every agency in the 23rd Judicial District, comprising Douglas, Elbert, and Lincoln counties. That doesn't mean in every investigation all agencies participate or even participate equally when they do. What it does mean is that we go to these experienced detectives to investigate this case free of influence from the parent agency. So in this particular case, Nicholas Moore is a Douglas County Sheriff's Deputy. They were not allowed to participate in the part of this investigation that we're going to talk about here today. So I put up here the agencies that were involved, and you'll notice that some of them are even as far away as Littleton. And to give you some example of some of the things that they can do, Douglas County Sheriff's Office has the CSI team that most of the agencies around here rely upon when there's a crime that has forensic evidence. Well, we obviously couldn't use that team. So the investigation used the CSI team from Parker to conduct this investigation. This has a number attached to it because it's the first officer-involved shooting in this jurisdiction in 2025. The lead agency, and it's on a rotational basis, was Castle Rock Police Department, and they are present in the room with us today. The single issue that I am tasked with reviewing is whether or not Deputy Moore's use of deadly force was a crime under Colorado law. There's a specific statute that grew out of the events, out of the George Floyd incident, that tried to really drill down on some specifics that should be investigated for an event like this. They're captured in this statute, Title 18. That's the first number you see is the criminal code for us, most of the substantive charges. This involves more procedural stuff, but it also is in that section that includes self-defense and defense of others. This specifies that the use of physical force is justified only if non-violent means would be ineffective in preventing an imminent threat of injury to the police officer or another person. That's the first lens that we begin to look at. The other portion of that statute is, did the officer have an objectively reasonable belief? There's two kinds of belief you can have. Subjective, which is just what do you feel, independent of anything else. Objective belief means objectively a group of people, the third person out there that would look at this, objectively, was it reasonable given the information that they had? Objectively reasonable belief that a lesser degree of force would be inadequate and that he or she or another person was in imminent danger of being killed. Well, that really helps us focus the investigation into what did Deputy Moore know and believe, and was it objectively reasonable to believe that? So I want to tell you about some things that aren't relevant to our investigation or analysis, even if they could be known, and even if they would later be revealed. What's not relevant is whether Mr. Sebrin violated the law. That's not relevant, and so I'm not going to address it here. It's also not relevant what Mr. Sebrin's actual intentions were given the conduct that took place in the parking lot of the main event. It doesn't matter whether he thought he was engaging in defense of himself or others. It doesn't matter if his firearm was lawfully possessed. None of that matters when what we're focusing on is the objectively reasonable belief of the deputy, because he can't know any of those things when he acts. Deputy can't know whether or not the firearm is loaded. He can't know whether or not he thinks he's acting in self-defense, he being Mr. Sebrin. He can't know what actually occurred in the main event, and honestly, it's not relevant. It's not relevant what happened inside the main event, and as an aside, because our office is prosecuting a number of individuals based on the events that took place in there, it would be a violation of my ethical standards, of the state's ethical standards, for me to comment on what took place inside that theater beyond how it is directly relevant to this particular investigation. So there are videos inside. We're not playing those. They're not relevant. Deputy couldn't have seen them before he made the decisions that he made that evening. It's also not relevant what pictures are inside. It's not relevant what 911 calls there were, other than to set the stage for the chaos that was ensuing outside the main event. That's the only relevance those 911 calls can have, because Deputy Moore never heard any of them. When he arrives on scene, and we'll talk about the information he had, he didn't know a bunch of things. He didn't know the shooter's description. Doesn't know if the shooter was a man or a woman, a boy or a girl, tall or short, black or white, or anything else. Knows that there's an active shooter. Doesn't know if there's more than one shooter. Just knows that there's an active shooting that is taking place. He doesn't know where the shooters are, if there are multiple shooters, or where the shooter is. He doesn't know what weapons they're using. He doesn't have that information. He doesn't know the number of injured or dead that he'll encounter. So with that framework, we'll start to talk about the agency itself, the deputy, and then the information he had at the time that he made the decision to use deadly force. Those letters up there are Douglas County Sheriff's Office. OIS is Officer Involved Shootings. Went back and had someone take a look at the last 20 years of officer involved shootings in Douglas County. During that 20-year period of time, which leads up to this, there have been 13 officer involved shootings. Now, that doesn't mean there were 13 officers involved. There were 13 incidents that took place, but there were 17 people that were shot by law enforcement, by Douglas County Sheriff's deputies, during those 13 incidents. Out of all of those incidents, going back 20 years, one, and that was 20 years ago, was a black male. The main event itself, that evening, Deputy Moore had been in the parking lot and conducted, by his word, a traffic stop. He'd stopped a vehicle that was leaving the parking lot without its headlights on. He did not leave his car to go into the building to do a walkthrough because he had no cover. He was off, away from the main event, but not very far, doing the data information entry at about the time the calls started coming in. There were 911 calls. He didn't hear them. Their importance is only for context only. There were 14 of them that took place prior to Deputy Moore arriving on scene. In fact, the 14th of those 911 calls, you can hear the gunshots from Deputy Moore take place at the tail end of that 911 call. Deputy Moore arrives on scene that evening because he is the closest vehicle available, the closest deputy available. So who is Deputy Moore? It's important to know what his background and experience are. He has been in law enforcement for 11 years, sheriff's deputy for 12. You can see that he has been on some significant units. The Pattern Crimes Unit, he'd spent some time on the regional SWAT team. He was a field training officer. This was not a newbie. This was a guy who had experience. He'd had prior law enforcement experience to that and a stint as an EMT as well. His training included rifle qualification, and he was an instructor on active threats, driving, high-risk stops, and master taser. He was involved in a prior officer-involved shooting that involved 6 separate deputies. This is the case number associated with it. I have had today either a link or that officer-involved shooting report uploaded to our website right now for you to be able to access it. The key takeaway from that is that investigation, not by me, not by my office, resulted in a finding of a justification of a use of deadly force in that case. For those of you that may remember it, was an RTD shooting not terribly far from here. That night, Deputy Moore was in uniform. He was wearing a standard uniform. He had visible patches, badge, all the other accoutrements that you would expect to see in law enforcement, some of them that you see around here even in the courthouse. The weapons that he had available to him included the one displayed. That's that Sig Sauer 5.56 millimeter semi-automatic rifle. Those are the rounds that he had and the ones that were unspent after this incident. He also had a 9 millimeter Glock handgun available and an Axon taser. His vehicle that evening was marked. We know that for a billion different reasons, but this is body cam of another officer who arrived with Deputy Moore's vehicle inside his body-worn camera view right there. After the 911 calls, because he was the closest call, he was dispatched. He did hear the dispatch calls.
4 David 3460 to 31, copy a shooting at the main event. 64 Centennial Boulevard, the main event entertainment center against 64 Centennial Boulevard. We have multiple callers advising there's screaming and shots were heard. Gunshots from inside the building. Another party advised someone walked in and started shooting. The last unit, I couldn't copy your unit number. That unit, I can't copy your unit number. You're muffled. 4 David 31, confirm your route.
661, break me, and I'll be around code 3.
4 David 41, same traffic. Shots fired.
Copy, shots fired. All units, emergency traffic for the main event, 2363. 6 David 31, I copy, shots fired, 2363. 4 David 31, code 8.
Is it coming from within or outside?
We got a couple people shot, front entrance. We need multiple people here now. 4, Robert 81. I'm almost on scene. Get your rifle. We're going to make entry. Possible shooter inbound.
Confirmed.
The tail end of that could not have been heard by Deputy Moore because he's the one that called in, I believe, the shots fired portion of that call. But the rest of that was a condensed version of the calls that came in over the period of time that Deputy Moore would have been receiving the dispatch call and then arriving on scene. This is the main event center. This is where he was at the time. I think it was the United Methodist Church parking lot that he was sitting in doing his work from the prior contact. That is a very short distance to get there. When he drove to the scene, for obvious reasons, his emergency lights were activated. But there was no siren, no audible announcement of his arrival. Why? Because Deputy Moore said he wanted to avoid alerting the shooter because the shooter could take action against him if he came in and knew he was coming. There's another source of information that the deputy had after he was dispatched, and that's those CAD notes. He did have access to these and saw not all, but many of them. These are the timestamps associated with those CAD notes that he had. He was dispatched. The CAD notes, not speaking. This is all on his display in his vehicle. Lots of screaming, lots of gunshots heard, hearing shots, people fleeing out of the building. Shots heard inside, 10 shots, coming from the main entrance. Another caller, gunshots from inside the building. Somebody walked in and started shooting, sounded like it came from the front of the building. Another caller saying this is a shooting, sounded like it was coming from the front. And it was after that, very quickly after that, that Deputy Moore arrives at the front of the main event. The last one that came in there was additional RP reporting party says she is hit, now screaming. That's the information he had as he rolls up on the scene. Now there are 3 videos that you all know exist. One is the dash cam from Deputy Moore's vehicle, one is the body cam from his person, and one is from the main event building. All of those videos, my understanding is, any media outlet that has asked for them has been given the raw video from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. What I don't intend to do is to play at length each of those raw videos because I don't think that helps us get to this. I think you've seen the videos, and if you haven't, they're available. If you have trouble getting them, let us know. Deputy Moore describes seeing chaos. In fact, as he's coming up on what I'll describe as the west side of the building, if you're familiar with the area, the part of the building that faces the AMC 24, but across that big parking lot, he says people are fleeing out of this building, and he can see that even as he comes into the front. He says he sees a black male with a gun near the entrance. He tells investigators, I did not expect to encounter someone with a gun outside the main entrance of this. He described that individual, who we now know as Jalen Sebrin, as agitated in his interactions with others. Deputy Moore grabs his rifle. Why the rifle? I asked that question. And the answer is, for an active shooter situation, it is a superior weapon. He sees an armed person, and the goal isn't to match whatever the other person has, it's to have that superior weapon, and he does. He also says that when he gets into the parking lot, he makes eye contact with Mr. Sebrin. Now, if you look at those videos, as you blow up the pictures, and we'll see some of that later in here, it becomes too pixelated to be able to see the moment when that occurs. But looking at those videos, you can see times where that is absolutely a possibility given where each of them are facing. One of the things that we're asked to analyze, and I should tell you, this officer-involved shooting investigation letter, the determination, that's up on our website right now. 17 pages, goes into a ton of detail that I'm not covering here. One of the questions that's asked by the law is, why not less lethal? There's got to be a reason why not less lethal. And the reason Deputy Moore says he did not consider less lethal in the situation was because it was an active shooter situation. He engaged a suspect that was holding a firearm, and he was the only law enforcement officer at the time in the area. He stated he would not have used a less lethal system against a suspect armed with a firearm. This is one of those images, I believe, from his dash cam as he pulled up here. This is Mr. Sebrin. And if you can look at that picture even here, you can see that he's holding something up in his right hand. And if we expand and focus on that piece, the gun, and that's not the expanded view, that is the gun that was ultimately found next to the car where Mr. Sebrin had been shot and killed. And it is the gun that traces back to Mr. Sebrin. He points the gun 3 times. This is the first time. You can see when it happens, Deputy Moore is already in the parking lot with lights displayed. And if you watch the video, and I encourage you to do it, you can see those lights are reflecting off of the snow and other vehicles as he comes in. There's Mr. Sebrin with the handgun up in the air. That's the first time. He then does it a second time. And you can see again, there's the officer, lights are still displayed. This is Mr. Sebrin again, directing it towards that main entrance and some other folks. There's a third and final time. You can see, and I didn't highlight the officer's car again. You can see right there, you can just see the hand over. Well, it's not going to be there. Right there. Over the hood of the car. Oh, there it is. This is the location of where the handgun was found and the location of where the events took place that led to his death. There's a witness also in the OIS report that you'll see that here's consistent with that conduct. Y'all better back the fuck up before I shoot. Now, it's important only to give context and consistency with the conduct that was observed. Deputy Moore did not hear that. He makes contact, he aims the rifle, and you can see in this image right here, there's Mr. Sebrin, there's the body cam, and it's just underneath the rifle that you can see Mr. Sebrin. His back is to Mr. Moore, or Deputy Moore. Deputy Moore gave no verbal warning in terms of stop, police, or sheriff's deputy, or anything like that. There's the statute again, use of force by peace officers, that says, and this is a bit of the misinformation that's gone out there, an officer shall identify himself with a verbal warning. That part is out there, and he surely did not do that. But within this same statutory section, it says, unless to do so would unduly place peace officers at risk or would create a risk of death or injury to other persons. And Deputy Moore says, at that moment, I felt like I had to act quickly to try to stop the threat. His first verbal order is, hey, drop the gun. And this is where that takes place. He then says, drop the gun now. That's the second time. And you can begin to see, and I'll blow this one part up, you can begin to see Mr. Sebrin's body turn towards the deputy while still holding the gun. Deputy yells, drop it now. That does not happen. Shots fired. And this is when the shooting begins to take place. Now, Castle Rock Police Department constructed a timeline that shows you just how quickly all of this transpired. The distance between them, based on looking at a FARO-scan, which is a super high-tech analysis of the entire area in 3D, this and that, they determined that the distance between them was 13 feet, that 9 rounds were fired, and that it took 4 seconds from the time that the shooting began. There were 2 impacts that were not Mr. Sebrin. To the right rear passenger door of the Nissan Sentra, that's 1 bullet fragment, and these are just some of the images of where it was found. 3 bullet fragments, that's not to say 3 bullets. These are pieces of bullets, they were recovered. One fragment was recovered from the front door and 2 from the rear door. And these are images of what they discovered during their investigation. There was an autopsy done by Dr. Leon Kelly. There's some coincidence there, but that's the name of our medical examiner. No relation. There's actually 7 rounds, not 6. I should change that. 7 rounds that resulted in 8 wounds. That's because some of the rounds went through one part of the body into another, and there's an 8th wound on the top of Mr. Sebrin's buttocks that was more of an abrasion than it was a penetration. Here are the injuries, and the autopsy, by the way, has been, I believe, released by the coroner to the family. It's out there somewhere. I've heard people comment on it. Here are the wounds. To the left axilla, that is like the armpit. And the coroner says that that bullet is moving left to right. There's left arm into the chest area, through the left elbow into the chest. There's also a round that went in through the left forearm. There's a shot into the upper left back, which ended up into the right arm. Lower right back, that was a back to front shot, and the lower left back to front. It appears from the images in the video and the autopsy that Mr. Sebrin was partially turned to the left towards the officer, consistent with his description, and those rounds begin to impact him on his left side. But those wounds, especially the early ones, penetrated lungs, the aorta. They were lethal. And as Mr. Sebrin began to collapse, the deputy pulled the trigger more, and that accounts for the shifting fire ultimately into his back. And here are the injuries as we've mapped them out. You can see most of them on the left side, one on the right. Now, I've heard out there, I've read people saying he was shot in the back 9 times, he was shot in the back 6 times. None of that is true. He does have shots to the back, but they do not appear to be anywhere near that number. And best analysis, based on the video and these injuries, they were the last of the shots that went into Mr. Sebrin. One of the things that I thought was important to discuss, which was also in the autopsy, was the toxicology of Mr. Sebrin. Clearly, Deputy Moore can't know this. That's not why it's relevant. Why it's relevant is to try to explain some of the decision-making that perhaps Mr. Sebrin went through and his failure to acknowledge or respond to the deputy in that situation. The analysis shows that Mr. Sebrin had alcohol in his system at levels which, even if they were questioned as to whether they could be 100% accurate, no doubt recent consumption of alcohol. He also had delta-9 THC. That is that active component of THC that impacts your brain. The test revealed that he had more than 10 times the limit that would have been permissible had he been driving a motor vehicle. And then finally, he had psilocin in his blood as well. That is the metabolite from magic mushrooms, from psilocybin mushrooms. He had a firearm. And while Deputy Moore can't know or honestly give any care to whether it was real or fake or loaded or unloaded or didn't work, I know the community wants to know. So we did get that information. This is that firearm. His firearm was a Glock 48, 9mm. It was legally purchased. He has that extended looking magazine, but that extended looking magazine is still legal. When you see 14+1 for the uninitiated, it means that the magazine holds 14, but there's one already in the chamber ready to go. And that's the picture on, well, I guess that's the next one. That's the picture on the right-hand side, this one right here. That firearm could function, it was capable of shooting. But I want to stress, it was legally purchased and there was nothing illegal about the magazine. Given the information that the deputy had, that the deputy was confronted with at the time that he made the decision to use deadly force, I believe that his conclusions were objectively reasonable. And so the question that was Deputy Moore's use of deadly physical force a violation or a crime under Colorado law? My answer is no. But even if I were to determine that there was an open question about that, and there was some other prosecution that should have been considered, and I don't, there are two ethical standards that all prosecutors have to abide by. One is, if they're going to bring charges against someone, do they have a good faith basis to believe that individual is guilty of the charges they're bringing? And I don't have any charges I believe I can bring related to the use of deadly force that I'd have a good faith basis for. And even if I said yes, and I don't, I would also have to believe that I had a reasonable likelihood of success at trial and prosecuting those charges, and I do not. So for legal reasons, evidentiary reasons, and ethical reasons, I find that the shooting, as tragic as it was, and I know everyone out there thinks to themselves, there are a million different decisions made by multiple people that could have avoided this, that it was a justified use of deadly lethal force under Colorado law. I asked you all here to have the opportunity to ask questions, and I make myself open for that now. If you don't have questions now, but you have them later, please reach out. I'm happy to have this conversation with the public.
George, real quick, I know you kind of covered it, but when the deputy shows up in the vehicle, it clearly states who he works for. Does he or does he not verbally identify himself?
He does not.
Have to, and does he have to?
No. My analysis of this is that exception that's built into the law that says unless the deputy believes that to take that time to do so would put himself or others at risk, and I believe him when he says that.
George, what was your eureka moment when you realized, yes, this was a justified shooting?
I don't know if there was just one moment, because if you just watch the video at full speed, I think everybody has that, oh my God, and that just happened so quickly. But when you step back and look at all the things this deputy was confronted with, audibly and visually, in such a short period of time, the question I ask myself is, what else? And I know everyone has an answer, like, could he have waited longer? Well, let's pretend it's not Jalen Sebring. Let's pretend it's not a guy who's there on his birthday and thinks he's defending his friends or his family. Let's think it's really an active shooter. Maybe it's someone suffering under some mental delusion. That extra time to do that, if the deputy had rolled up and allowed that person to shoot just one more person, wouldn't we all be sitting here going, why the hell didn't he take action? That was the moment.
B.A. Brauchler, you mentioned
Yes, sir.
that the image shows that few, if any, of those shots were in the back. Does those images also suggest that there were shots from the front?
No, we had no evidence of shots from the front at all. It looks like the injuries that he suffered were on the left side, from the arm going back to front, and then as he rolled, it appears that's when those extra shots are in the back.
And how many shots was justified at that particular point? Was there an time where he was facing him and the gun was pointed at the deputy? I'm concerned about how many shots was necessary at that particular time.
It's a fair question. I asked that question myself. The training that these men and women go through is you stop the threat. That's one. Two, there is a legitimate study, field of study out there called force science. And force science talks about what does the brain go through in a moment like this, once you've made the decision to engage. And it's not like the movies. It's not like you pull the trigger once and see what happens. That's not how it works. But part of my analysis was to look at the nature of the injuries that were caused by even what I presume to be the first or second shots, and they would have been lethal. Had those shots taken place in an emergency room, nobody was going to save that young man's life.
There's a part in the video when the officer is first getting onto the scene and clearly approaching who he believes is this gunman, where there are other people who are saying, wait, like, hold on, you have the wrong guy, type of, I mean, I'm not quoting it verbatim, but they're clearly trying to get the officer's attention. In the training and in your review of that evidence, how does that play into what happened?
Yeah, I don't recall him hearing that any more than he heard that person that yelled at, or that heard Jalen say, hey, back up or I'm going to shoot you or do it, or whatever the words were. But there was also a person that was out there in the parking lot trying to get the officer's attention, not to say this isn't the guy, but to say, come help my sister who was shot inside the main event. He doesn't hear that either. He is so focused on what he perceives to be the threat. I don't think those were things that, even had he heard them, would have registered or changed him.
Going back to the alcohol content, could you go back to that? I want to make sure I'm clear.
Yes, sir.
How much alcohol did he have, and would you consider that level to be intoxicated?
Yeah, so the coroner's report said that the blood alcohol content was 0.384. That is an excessive amount of alcohol. Even if you're a professional drinker, it's hard to imagine operating your feet with a 0.384. There was an email that was sent to the coroner asking to clarify. The coroner sent it was by a group, and the coroner sent out an email, I think we got copied on it, and said, what we can't do through this process is determine what is antemortem or postmortem alcohol. We can't say it with that kind of accuracy, but it seems like, given what they discovered, it was likely to be an intoxicating amount. But 384, I can't tell you that that's right.
Can you talk a little bit more about Deputy Moore's disciplinary record? I know that there was an officer involved shooting at one, but are there any other items in his record other than that would give reason for pause?
I don't know the answer to that, sir. And candidly, I didn't ask or look for it. I don't know the answer.
And also concerning the shots, does the coroner's report give you information about the sequence of the shots? You said he had two deadly shots that would have killed him anyway, but how do you pinpoint whether or not those shots that were fired could have been enough to enable him rather than the shots that actually took his life?
That's a very fair question. One, I don't think that the order in which the coroner numbered the wounds necessarily means that that was his determination. But while we're all sitting here, there is somebody way smarter than I am. There's many people, but two of them that were on this case. Corey, did the coroner ever talk about how they sequenced the injuries, like with specificity versus the likelihood of the injuries being in that order?
He specifically did not opine on that. He just listed them in the order he saw them, and his report specifically says the sequence in which he orders them is not consistent with how they were done. That's not his determination to make, nor only how we number them in terms of his evaluation.
And some of my conclusions are based upon the video in combination with when we know the shots were fired and how his body ended up after he had been shot. Those things to me, and the trajectory of the rounds, suggest someone who had turned left, but not all the way, and as they were being shot, began to collapse towards the right again.
What is the history of somebody firing that many shots as opposed to neutralizing the situation?
And sir, when you say history, what do you mean?
Is there anything documented about neutralizing an active shooter that has been shot that many times?
I don't know the answer to that, sir. I'm sorry. I don't.
And it's tragic. I'm just trying to get information.
No, these are all fair questions. I don't know the answer to that.
George, was there any relevancy in what you addressed with the deputy's response to the second individual in the restroom? Is there any relevancy between those two individuals and how the deputy responded?
I'm not sure I understand entirely, but if you're asking, is there a connection
Yes.
between them? There has been stuff reported that's a connection between them. For our purposes, I feel a little hamstrung by my ethical obligation not to talk about the case on the inside of the main event, and that prosecutor's in this room, and I'm sure he would be very, very disappointed if I started going down that road. But there are things in the public stream that talk about what relationship might exist.
Why was Deputy Moore's identity not made public until this moment?
There had been numerous reports that we hadn't received directly, but through law enforcement, that there were concerns about potential death threats that came from this and threats of reprisal. It was always going to have to come out. I mean, when you've got a taxpayer-funded law enforcement officer who uses force that the government and us give them, and it takes a life, got to be known. But in the early portions of the investigation, the thought was, let's try to figure out how real these threats are and if we have to take any other action. But for this setting, it was always going to be known.
Were those threats ever corroborated or?
That's a question better served to the intel guys and to the Douglas County Sheriffs, but my understanding is there isn't anything at this time that they have any concerns about that would cause us to not put his name out.
And then going through all the facts, you determined legally there's justification here. Is there anything that came out of this that you feel like Deputy Moore should have handled differently in that moment?
Listen, isn't that the question that every single one of these incidents brings to mind? And that is, my God, isn't there some way we could have avoided this outcome? Isn't there something that could have been done? Especially when we're talking about a Mr. Sebring who was not the person inside the main event, engaged in the stuff that we've alleged in that way, especially because of what we know or surmise might have been his motives afterwards. But honestly, you could go crazy asking yourself, what if? But in that moment, the question that I have to answer is, in that moment, was his belief objectively reasonable that if he did not take the action that he took, that his life, or most likely others, would be in danger? And given what he observed, given what he had heard, given what he had read, I think it was objectively reasonable.
I'm assuming that there's probably recorded interviews of Deputy Moore as part of this investigation.
There are.
Asking him. And
There are.
Did you see any of those videos, and did he say at any time in those videos that he felt the shooting was justified?
Yeah, well, those interviews, as you can imagine, aren't just 5 or 15 minutes, and I watched significant portions of those videos, and he's never just asked outright, did you feel like it was okay to do it? It's always in terms of, what were you thinking here? Why did you do this? Why did you make that decision? Like the decision to grab the rifle, the decision to not announce yourself, the decision to give him the 3 commands in that shorter period of time, and he addressed all of those things in the video.
Mr. Brauchler.
Oh, I'm sorry, I can't see. If there's a hand, I see one hand back here.
Mr. Brauchler, Dr. Malcolm,
Yes, sir?
is it clear that Mr. Sebring has not fired his weapon at all?
It's clear that he has not fired his weapon at all.
First of all, thank you for what I consider to be a very open conversation and transparent. I applaud you for that. I have a question that perhaps is not really relevant to what occurred, but yet it is relevant because of some of the innuendos, misinformation, or perhaps even disinformation that we're hearing in my community. And that is the question, has this officer been involved in the shooting of any other black person in his time as an officer? Because that's being said.
I'm not aware of that being the case, but can I just take a moment to ask, hey, detective, have you come across anything like that?
No, the only other shooting was involved in close suspect.
And let me confirm for you too, Dr. Malcolm asked about Mr. Sebring's firearm not being discharged. That's true. We have no evidence that he fired that, right? Okay, thank you. Sir, does that answer your question?
Yes, it did. Yes, it did.
What else? What else can I answer for you? Anybody?
You said you spoke with his family. at length? Did you go into this much detail, more detail? How did you see it?
We and the family's attorney, very experienced attorney, been doing this a long time, is in the room with us now. We sat down, and I told them the same thing I told you. I've never done this before. I've done a number of officer-involved shooting investigations and issued reports and put them online, but I don't recall ever meeting with the family of the deceased. And this one felt unique and important to me to do something different. Well, one of those things involved meeting with the family, and we gave their attorney and all the people that were there in the room copies of the officer-involved shooting report before we posted it online, and obviously before I talked to you about it here. And it has probably more detail on many aspects than even this presentation does. Corey, would you say that?
It has some different.
Okay, well, there you go.
George Brauchler, I want to just get some clarity in terms of your presentation.
Yes, sir.
It sounds as though your decision is based on the deputy's actions in that 7 seconds without regard to anything outside of that. In other words, what he knew or the decision he made in the 7 seconds. So all of the discussion that's taking place about what happened inside, what happened around, and all of that, your decision is based on his actions in that time period, in his thinking, and that's basically what has led to your decision.
Thank you for the question. Not quite. What's important is, and you can tell from the laws that dictate how I do this, is that what's important is the decision to use deadly physical force against another person. That decision took place in that very tight window. But what I wanted to consider, and what I did consider, and what I've displayed to you here, these are the things he knew. And where there are things out there, whether they cut in favor or against the use of deadly physical force, if he doesn't know them, I can't really consider them. So he can't know what's going on inside other than what comes across in dispatch or the CAD reports. So I did consider those because he gets to know those things. But everything else that took place in there, he can't know it. So it may be an analysis of the decision that took place in that tight window, but it does include information that took place outside that window.
What do you say to people who may ultimately disagree with your decision, given your presentation, even in the light of your presentation?
Say that part again, sir?
What do you say, George, to people who will disagree with your decision?
Ask your questions, but I mean, listen, I get that this isn't satisfying to folks who already have a sense of what happened, either because they're predisposed to think in those terms or because what they saw in the video backs up this thought that, well, here we go again. Another white law enforcement officer killed a black man. That must mean blank. And I imagine that this decision is one that with those groups, those individuals, they're going to say, well, what could you expect from a white district attorney in a white county making that decision? I can't change their minds or their hearts, but the point of doing this, Jeremy, is to say, I'm telling you what I considered and how I came to this conclusion. You don't have to agree with it, but question it, challenge it, and then if you decide at the end of the day, that guy's an idiot, I think he did it wrong, okay, but now you'll know. Listen, I wish every DA on officer-involved shootings like this did something like this to engage the community. Why they don't, I don't know. I didn't before this, but this is how I want to do this moving forward when it comes to things like this, because I don't think we get better with less information and less access. And I'm never going to make a decision, man, that everybody agrees with. I mean, we don't win every jury trial, right? If we were that great at deciding what cases that a jury is going to agree on, and we were that great at jury selection, we'd be at 100%. Well, that's not true. But when it comes to exercising my discretion in the way that the law and ethics dictate here with this evidence, I'm confident that I've made the right decision.
I know that this is tragic, but do you think that being that Deputy Moore was considered a trainer, like he trained in these environments,
yep.
Do you see that this would potentially be a best practice of how training would move forward? I know it's a difficult conversation. Did you consult other folks that may have been in these scenarios, law enforcement, what other opinions did you get and feedback did you get other than Moore, who is a trainer of dynamics like this?
Well, as you can see, multi-agencies were involved in the investigation of this, and when it came time to do the presentation of that officer-involved shooting investigation, and that took place right in this room just last week, all of those questions got to be asked. I mean, there were things like I told you about, like why 9? Why, why keep pulling the trigger? And these are men and women that have gone through immense amounts of training, some of them situations that touch upon these issues. And they all had answers to give when they brought the experience to bear on this. I should tell you too, by the way, this came up in our meeting with the family. That officer-involved shooting investigation that was done, that Castle Rock led, it did not end with the officer who made the presentation. There were 2 detectives saying, and therefore we conclude this. That is not what happened. They said, here's what our investigation revealed, here's this information, ask your questions, and then I sat down with it along with my prosecution team, and we came up with this report and this conclusion.
There were some concerns from the family about how long.
Sorry.
There were some concerns with the family for how long it's taking to get some answers. My understanding is that they probably didn't get this information that you presented until earlier today, you said. Can you provide a little bit more clarity as to what the process of all of this looks like, as to why perhaps it's just 2 months after the initial incident?
Yes, and let me say this, and law enforcement guys and gals in the room will acknowledge this too. 2 months, pretty damn fast for these things, that we actually move this thing forward pretty quickly. But the reason we don't give out information piecemeal, ma'am, is that if at the end of this, the conclusion is, you know what? I think that officer violated the law, and I am going to bring charges against that officer. Having put all that information out to the stream would actually be an ethical violation for me, because I cannot poison the well against a defendant on any case, whether it's law enforcement or any of us or anybody else. So the reason we keep that information close hold is to protect the integrity of the case and keep it in a posture where if the decision is made to prosecute, we can do it ethically, and we don't have to worry about some super smart defense attorney or other attorney like a Mr. Glover or Miss Boehm showing up and going to court and saying, Brauchler poisoned the well on the way to this decision. How is my guy supposed to get a fair trial? That's what they would say.